When it comes to writing a good story, there are a lot of things to consider. The plot, the characters that live in the world, and the world itself. When making a world unlike our own, whether it be fantasy, alternate history, science fiction, or dystopia, the main goal of a writer making said world is to make it believable, lively, and not just an afterthought. There are many aspects to world building that can make or break a reader's immersion into a world. One of which is used a lot in a narrative sense, but so often misused or misunderstood. That aspect is oppression, mistreatment of groups for one reason or another. When written correctly, it can become a powerful narrative tool, one that could be inspirational and one that could create compelling stories. But this aspect of storytelling / world building is often neglected, and unfortunately it is sometimes not utilized well. At best, it comes off as ignorant or insensitive. At worst, it actually justifies the mistreatment the story tries to paint as bad. So in this video, I will try my best to explain how to properly write oppression, persecutions, and mistreatment of groups for the basis of writing and storytelling. What to do and what to avoid, so you don't have to repeat the same mistakes as some of these writers, showing good examples of oppression while also showing the bad ones. Quick disclaimer here, I'm in no way a writing professional. I'm just a guy who enjoys listening and learning about history, world building, fantasy stories that take place in other worlds. I'm only ever really written world building and geopolitics, so I consider myself knowledgeable in that regard. So don't take my word as gospel. Are we good? Okay, then let's start with the basics of oppression. First, we need to ask ourselves an important thing. What is oppression? This question seems simple on the surface, but once you get into it, it gets a bit complicated. Oppression isn't one thing. It can come in many different shapes and forms, whether it be systematic or not. But the general rule is that a group of people are in some way benefiting from a system built on the expense of others, or one group seeks to bring down another or exterminate them outright. Now, from here, this concept can be taken in any direction. The oppression can be class-based, the wealthy oppressing the working class or the peasantry. It kind of sounds familiar. Or it can be based on race, ethnicity, language, culture, or religion, where one group dominates and tries to suppress another to either assimilate them or wipe them out completely. Or, in the less extreme cases, social or discrimination or hatred at a societal level. It's not systematic or legally encouraged, but still happens regardless. These kinds of oppression are known to be prevalent throughout human history for one reason or another. It's not as rigid as how I described it. Social discrimination can easily become institutional discrimination if the hatred gains momentum. The most obvious example that comes to mind are the Nazis of the 20th century. The reason why writing oppression in a form where it's well written and does not come off as insensitive is so difficult is because many who write it do not actually want to go into the darker details of it, and oftentimes write the oppressors as either misunderstood or people who are just scared. This point is fair. A lot of the time, said media are meant for all ages, and many can't handle the darker details. But this leads to the issues I've stated at the start of the video, that being, these aspects are often neglected. How would it be done properly, though? Let's ask a simple question. Why would one group willingly throw another group under a bus? This is something that is often messed up, but here are aspects my friend Stoney actually pointed out for me. Greed, fear, power, or just plain stupidity. The first aspect, greed, is pretty straightforward. A group finds monetary incentive to oppress another group for profits, whether it be slavery, wage slavery, systematic takeover of native lands, or menial labor for the wealthy elite. If the divide is racial or simply class-based, it's up to the writer. Fear is the second aspect. It's the main and most effective reason why oppression of a group happens. A powerful and wealthy upper class fears the common man's vast numbers and fears the day they unionize and take down the evil bourgeoisie. Another way fear is utilized is by using it to justify excluding groups from society, whether it be through the fear of a minority, fear of a majority, or an equally sized group. This fear can manifest with propaganda or over-exaggeration of certain events to paint a whole group as evil. If an individual from a group commits terrorism or kills someone, an individual who wants to stroke fear for their own agenda can use this as an example of not an individual issue but a group issue, claiming that said group is uniquely violent or defective in some way, thus fueling the fear of said group, and therefore they demand action to protect themselves from said group. Power. A potent factor in oppression. If an individual or a group has an underclass or people answering to them, it gives them a sense of pride, approval, superiority, power, and thus gives you the power to do what you wish without consequences, so if anyone steps out of line, they are dealt with quickly. And finally, stupidity. Oftentimes this aspect comes as a consequence of the other factors. Power gives you pride and makes you arrogant, so if things don't go your way, they will not look to themselves to see if they are the issue, they would scapegoat anyone else. Your country is in an economic ruin after a devastating war you lost because of your stupid decisions? Blame it on an already disadvantaged minority. Find viable solutions for problems you are facing meant to help your group or nation in the long term? Nope, blame the bad economy on almost homeless working class who just want wage increases so they can eat and feed their families while you live in luxury. These aspects, if mixed together, can make for a realistic form of oppression, which can sometimes lead to genocide or mass killing. An inciting incident can cause problems for a regime or a group, often because of their own decisions. To prevent their people from overthrowing them, they blame it on certain people, whether it be opposition members, ethnic, racial, or religious groups, or the poor. Use of fear tactics and constantly blaming them for stuff they are not responsible for and excluding them from society. After that, they are dehumanized and are seen as animals. Therefore, it's okay to wipe them out. But genocide isn't always a viable option. Sometimes a group is too big or too vital to just wipe out, so instead, they work to break their spirits, make them poorer, unable to fight. Every time they try to do something, make an example out of them so they remain obedient. This form of oppression is most prevalent with regimes that are ruled by minorities. Take apartheid South Africa, for example, Rhodesia, Ireland, and the Balkans, and many others. These reasons and methods of oppression are very real, many still prevalent today. It's why it's so important to treat this topic with the respect it deserves, and why it's important to get that world-building aspect correct. Now that we got the basics out of the way, let's see some examples of oppression in fictional media, and how it's handled there, from the great examples to the bad ones, to show you what to do and what not to do. In Andor, specifically Season 2, we get introduced to the planet of Gorman. In the first episode, spoiler warning by the way, we learn about Gorman culture, their industry, their language, and pride for their culture. But what we get from this scene is emotional indifference. Emotional indifference from those present in the meeting to what was essentially a conversation about genocide. The Imperials thought of the Gore as a nuisance, as a sort of obstacle for their ambition, but they can't just kill them all. At that time, the Empire was still trying to hold up the image of a good and democratic empire by allowing the Senate to still exist. So, they needed a way to justify their plan, and there's one scene that captures their methods perfectly.
Why? She's a hunter, not a spin doctor.
Maybe she's oversight.
Or what? Smear campaign is an opening move, not an end game.
A smear campaign is an opening move, not an endgame. There is a model created by Gregory Stanton that shows various stages of how genocide happens. These 10 stages are almost universal. These are classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, extermination, and finally, denial. The stage Lutheran Rail talks about is discrimination and dehumanization. The show honestly deserves a video of its own. I could honestly talk about everything here in so much detail, but if you want a full in-depth analysis of Andor Season 2 or even Season 1, I recommend this video by Sean Grainer. Andor manages to encapsulate imperial oppression from the perspective of the average imperial citizen almost perfectly. Unlike what some apologists may think, the Empire encapsulates a unique, dehumanizing type of evil. From Season 1's bureaucratic evil and cold indifference to Season 2's methodical extermination. So what do we learn from Andor? Genocide does not start from a declaration or a gunshot, but starts with propaganda, dehumanization, and finding justification. Oppression does not come instantly, but gradually. When a new regime gets comfortable and stable, that's when they become dangerous. That's when they become oppressive. Unironically though, these are the same type of people who would probably fall for imperial propaganda in real life. Before I start this section, I should probably put this out there. I did not watch RWBY, nor have I ever actually been a fan of the show. This was mostly recommended to me by a subscriber when I asked for bad examples of oppression, and personally I'd never watch a show whose visuals looked like one of those shitty anime visual novels. But to be fair here, it is an indie animated show. I can forgive the visuals and some aspects of animation being a bit off because of the technical limitations and budget constraints. Besides, they were saving it up for the clearly well choreographed fight scenes. But what I can't forgive, however, is writing. There's already lots of problems with the story and the writing of this show, but this is a topic for another day. What I'm concentrating on is the fauna storyline, or specifically the whitefang. For context, faunas are a group of subspecies related to humans but have different animal features. They aren't exactly native to any specific region or continent in Remnant, they are just pretty much everywhere. The faunas, like real-life furries, are heavily persecuted. Every kingdom has some sort of problem with them one way or another. This oppression led to movements rising up demanding justice, equality, emancipation, and civil rights. On paper, this sounds like a solid plotline. The idea of a long-oppressed species rising up and seeing the struggles they face against institutional oppression can easily captivate people unfamiliar with those concepts and allow them to learn as a result about real-life struggles. But the execution could not have been any worse. The whitefang is a faunus militant group, often described as terrorists in the show. They're very clearly inspired by the Black Panther Party in the 60s, created to protect black neighborhoods and communities from racist attacks by the KKK and often the police. Now, what's important to note is the Black Panthers were not only a militia, they were far more than that. They opened up charities, operated free breakfast programs for struggling black students, and were often peacefully politically active. It's just their militant wing got all the coverage in the news, which led to a lot of fear by the predominantly white population. This eventually led to the Black Panthers' eventual downfall thanks to the CIA. Now, seeing that this is the clear main inspiration for the whitefang, you can see a lot of cool story potential. You would think they would make the whitefang a misunderstood group, who were demonized by different nations, which Team RWBY discovers the truth about them and bringing it to light, leading hopefully to the faunus gaining rights again. This is not the path the writers went for. First, Adam kills the leader of the whitefang for seemingly no reason and turns the group into a literal racial supremacist group, even though the whitefang literally achieved their goals for the most part, through fighting. The writers went for the idea that peaceful demonstration and action are better than violent action, which would be okay if it wasn't for the fact that the former failed. If an oppressive force makes a peaceful demonstration impossible, then the only path for any progress is violence. You can't blame the whitefang for being militant when peaceful demonstration led to nothing. While I'm at it, there are other faunus rights groups that exist, but they legitimately do nothing. This must be pointed out. Peaceful demonstration isn't begging the government for change, it's disrupting daily affairs of the government or the public to bring awareness to the problems you're fighting for without the use of violence. Worker strikes, sit-ins, protests, hunger strikes, all of these are peaceful forms of protest meant to disrupt daily life to bring attention to an issue you're fighting for, which also has the effect of showing the oppressive nature of the ruling regime when they eventually try to disperse them. And you know what? I could forgive all of this if it wasn't for the fact that the show treats the governments that oppressed the faunus as victims of terrorism. The show already has a lot of problems, and it would literally take me 2 hours just to explain them all. If you want to know more about the whitefang, you can watch this detail which goes into a lot more detail. So, what can we learn from RWBY? Well, it's simple. When a civil rights movement begins, it almost always starts peaceful. Protests, demonstrations, etc. But it's the response of the oppressive forces that can turn said movement violent. If you strip away the ability for protesters to demonstrate peacefully and nothing changes as a result of it, they will turn to their only option, violence. And it is important to note, if you want sympathy for the oppressed in a story, then the oppressors needs to have an unjustified reason for it, which, in their mind, is justified, whether it be fear, greed, ego, etc. This is the golden rule of character creation, no matter if they are good or evil. Everyone sees themselves as good, which leads to our next example. In The Last Airbender, we get introduced to the main villains of the show literally in the intro sequence, the Fire Nation. The Fire Nation is a colonial empire that had used its industrial might and its rapid technological progress to conquer most of the world during the 100 Years' War. Now, the writers could have just chalked it up to an evil empire motivated by some evil force that wants to take over everything and call it a day, since it's a kids show, but they didn't. They actually did good research on how colonial empires form, their motivations, their practices, and consequences. So what justifies colonialism? Let's see what Wikipedia says. Colonialism monopolizes power by understanding conquered lands and people to be inferior, based on beliefs of entitlement and superiority, justified with beliefs of having a civilizing mission to cultivate land and life, historically often rooted in the belief of a Christian mission. This goes into the important writing narrative, no one sees themselves as the bad guys, and often as a result justifies heinous crimes in the name of an overall good. They often believe that the ends justify the means. The result? Superiority complex, oppression of those who are viewed as lesser, cultural, religious, and linguistic suppression, erasure of history, ethnic cleansing, and often genocide. These actions by colonial powers, who people would obviously see as abhorrent, are often justified through altruistic and benevolent lenses, as in colonial empires believe in their own delusions that they are bringing civilization and their own superior culture to barbaric and inferior ones, which leads to the destruction of the culture in the lands they colonize, simply because they didn't advance fast enough. And this adds an aspect to colonial suppression that can occur when said so-called inferior culture actually wins over them: fear. In Avatar, the Fire Nation learns that the next Avatar would be from the Air Nomads, and the Avatar, being the single most important individual in the world, capable of stopping the Fire Nation's advance, would reasonably make the Fire Nation afraid of the new Avatar. So what do? Commit genocide and wipe out the entire air nomad population to make sure that the Avatar is killed while they're vulnerable. This proves that the Fire Nation, while powerful, is extremely paranoid and insecure about its position, to the point that they would wipe out an entire culture and peoples to make sure one individual does not rise up. And they justify this by saying the Avatar is evil and every single one of the air nomads could turn into one. They also spread the idea that the inferior colonized folks are out to get them, out to kill them all, so they have to keep oppressing them to secure their own existence. Sound familiar? What we understand from Avatar is that colonialism does not come immediately without a reason. Everything comes with a reason. For example, trapping a nation into debt, then coming in to colonize that nation to repay for it. Invading a nation for supposedly a good cause, like protecting a minority only to colonize them all equally. A virtuous mission to spread civilization, or just simply resource extraction. No one is evil for the sake of being evil. If there was no incentive for evil acts, whether it be financial or ideological, no one would be evil. It's also important to note, when making a reason for a colonial empire or an oppressive force to repress others, if you want the oppressed to be sympathized with, you cannot by any means make an actual valid justification. Otherwise, this would all be for nothing. Which leads to our next example. Okay, so when making this video, I didn't really expect to talk much about, well, talking animals, but here we are at every furry's holy grail, Zootopia. Also, I'll be only talking about the first movie. I didn't really watch the sequel. The movie itself was fine. It wasn't the furry awakening others experienced. The movie had its own issues, but in the end it's a kid's film. It served its purpose, making Disney a shit ton of money. So, predators and prey. These are the two overall umbrella groups that exist in Zootopia. The prey are the majority and the predators are the minority, and the predators are facing prejudice from the prey. Already you can see some issues at play here in this society. The main question being, what do predators eat? Prey are herbivores. They eat plants and other greens and insects. Predators do not eat plants. Their diet relies on meat, and often only meat. Obviously, a kid's film does not really explore this aspect of world building, but there are other media that does. Beastars, for example, explores those more uncomfortable aspects by introducing illegal butcher markets, bodies from hospitals being donated to be eaten, people literally selling their own fingers for profit. Which leads to the main issue of Zootopia. The prey, who are afraid of the predators despite being both intelligent, have every right to be afraid. Imagine living in harmony in the same city with people who literally need to eat you in order to survive. This is not a case of race, ethnicity, or language or religion being persecuted. This is an actual public security threat. The prey, and by extension the government, must put measures that unfortunately target the predators in order to maintain peace between the species. Now, in Zootopia, the two groups have long evolved to be intelligent and able to control their instincts. It was also actually a secret group of sheep who used a special drug to poison and cause the predators to go feral and animalistic. They do this in order to stoke tensions in the city against predators in order to kill them all or kick them out or something, but the writers ended up just chalking it up to a superiority complex. The main rule when writing about oppressed people, especially if you want them to be sympathized with, is to never give an actual justification for it, or if there is, make the response to such justification completely disproportionate and unnecessarily cruel. It's kinda why I don't really like these types of stories being set in animal-run worlds. While I see the intentions is good, highlighting racism and prejudice for a setting like this just doesn't really work. Okay, so the anime Frieren doesn't exactly have the prejudice in the same way I'm talking about, that being unjustified discrimination and evil forms of oppression. But what it does have is justified oppression and extermination, which is done very well. Demons in this setting aren't exactly people but act more like predators. They pretend to have emotions and empathy in order to lure in victims in order to kill them. So in that case, the people of the setting have every right to wipe them out entirely. If an entire species is written to literally be evil as fuck and don't understand or are not willing to understand why killing children is bad, for example, yeah, it's safe to say that this would be the most justified genocide in fiction. But a lot of people still make the connections between legitimate oppression and what was essentially glorified pest control. And let me be clear, it's okay to have a completely evil, unforgiving antagonist in your story. Same as how people like complex villains, just make sure it's clear that they are irredeemable. Oh boy, time for some shameless self-advertising. So with all these examples we talked about, you will probably have a good idea on how to write oppression that is both realistic and impactful. But how to actually implement it? Well, here's how I did it. This is Fire Dust of Albion, my world building project. The basic gist of it is, what if Christopher Columbus discovered a high fantasy world instead of America? I've already made several videos on this world, and now I'll show some cool lore for it. And for those who already know of Albion, you might want to stay around because I'm revealing some new stuff, okay? Ready? Alright. After the First Continental War, where the United Kingdom of Realmion conquered the native empire of Icarusai, their rule was not immediately noticed. Colonial troops, although victorious, were overstretched and undersupplied, but still maintained an image of power in the occupied urban centers. The colonial authorities in Dalreach needed an efficient method of governing the new swaths of territory they had just acquired. Otherwise, for the sake of stability, they would need to withdraw. But a previous ally and now protectorate came forth with a plan. Elleril, now renamed to Illyrion, was previously an ally turned protectorate of Realmion, and was instrumental in the war against Icarusai. So the nobility of Illyrion introduced what they called the RWBY system. This is a segregation system that separated territories reserved for Realmian and Illyrian settlers, and territories belonging to the Icaris and other native populations. The overall territories would be governed by Illyrian nobility, to take the burden off of Dalreach, having to only need to govern Elvandor and other major cities. This segregation system made the Ikari nobles a lower class than the Illyrian nobles, and thanks to their alignment with Pendor on the other side of the world, they came to rule over all of Cantera. Almost everybody suffered under the RWBY system, hell, even some human settlers, 90% of whom were lowly peasants who came here at the promise of wealth. None suffered more, however, than the Ikari Magisters. Initially, when Dalreach came to control Cantera, they did not put as much restrictions on Magisters, essentially treating their powers the same as any physical weapon or tool. Hell, for a while several covens were commissioned by Dalreach to deal with Magister insurgents, much to the dismay of Illyrion. This status quo lasted for a while, well, until 1399 that is. The Roseville bloodbaths happened. It showed how dangerous Magisters, and especially gold-blooded Magisters, can be. This massacre shocked the east of Realmion, and that shock led to fear. As the Second Continental War raged on, emergency laws essentially outlawed the use of magic in the colonies. But even after the war, the law stayed. The Swords Inquisition received royal funding after it was sanctioned by the Church, and their numbers quadrupled. Soon after, Magister women and Ardellisan elves as a whole became discriminated against heavily and feared due to their suspicion. By that point, the Illyrians had completely abandoned the LNA tradition, became human in all but race. The Magisters of Illyrion were treated as a curse, killed the moment they were found out. The Ikari, and by extension Ardell, mockingly began to call Illyrians Ruh Mirai, human elf, in Ikari. A law was passed by Dalreach that allowed the Swords Inquisition to racially profile female elves as potential Magisters. Every Magister, when they come of age, must be logged and tattooed on their wrists to be visible at all times, and need to be checked annually. This allowed discrimination to become more rampant, as Magisters now can easily be spotted, and they can't even use their powers to defend themselves, as doing so will result with their hands getting cut off. Now, I know what you might say. Sure, the treatment is cruel, but in the end it is justified. Magisters pose a grave threat to colonial forces, and if only 90 of them are able to kill 300,000 civilians in one night, what can an entire nation of them do? Well, to begin with, the numbers are wholly inaccurate, because all I have just described was information that were taken from a clearly biased source. In reality, Roseville was not a large city. It was a town of about closer to 30,000. Don't get me wrong, it's still a massacre and it is heinous, but not as inflated as people thought. In other detail, the 90 Magisters there were all gold-blooded elder witches, aka the best of the best Arcadia has, and we aren't even exactly sure if the attacks were unprovoked. Colonial authorities, especially the human supremacists, over-exaggerated detail to spread fear, arguing that if the elves are willing to kill that many of their own kin to prove a point, what would they do to them? And since the war was raging, there was no way to actually fact-check it, as information came slow and easy to spread as rumors or misinformation. Another important note is that Magisters don't all come equally. You may already know this if you watched the magic video, but the vast majority of Magister women can barely use their magic to actually fight with, only to defend themselves or do simple tasks. If you who have the power to become witches or mages, and even less than that, the Goldbloods are 1 in a million, especially with Goldbloods who are already very rare to begin with. Colonial authorities, with their existing racism and misogyny, villainize them to the point that they can't go outside without getting called names by colonial settlers and easternized elves. This led to many of them fleeing the urban centers into the countryside, but even there they still get attacked by settlers, which leads them to take a much more dangerous path to flee to the resistance forces in the mountains north of Kentera. The RMA laws were strengthened, a Karasaic culture getting more suppressed, and life for Magisters impossible. In the Ardell, magic is known as Alan's gift. In the colonies, it's Alan's curse. Wow, that was a whole lot of stuff. If you had enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe and click the little bell to get notified when I post my videos, because, well, my fall off has been insane. Join my Discord if you want some lore updates or sneak peeks for my next videos. Help out a little small artist in need, will ya? Anyways, sorry for not posting for a while, I had been busy and stuff. I hope you enjoyed this and I'll see you in the next video. The next empire I'll talk about will be Realmion, by the way.